topic today is Gaza. What comes next? We'll start by focusing on what's happening now, which is a lot this week. We have Professor Guy Ben-Gurion joining us from Israel, as well as Professor Yonatan Mendel, who is Israel's foremost authority from an academic standpoint on Gaza. And as many of you have joined us before, you know how this works. You can click on the Q&A function whenever you have a question, and we'll do our best to get these questions in front of our two panelists. And before we begin, I just want to thank the team behind the scenes that worked so hard to pull this off. Lenore Levine, who's our director of our programs and experiences, Cheryl Korlitz, who worked so hard, Blair Kahana, and Tali Goldshift from the marketing department. We had over 665 of you register for this webinar, which makes it one of the most popular we've ever done during a very troubling time. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to begin by just introducing our panelists, and then this webinar, which is called for just under an hour, will be a conversation in nature between Guy and Yoni. And feel free to ask your questions whenever those come up. So let's begin with Guy Ben-Gurion. And Guy, you may realize this, but this is an anniversary of sorts for you. This is the 10th webinar that you've done for Americans for Ben-Gurion University, which makes you our most sought after panelist in all of the university's 900 faculty members. So thank you.
Time to retire.
Not quite, but it's a nice thought. I wish we could give you a bonus for each time you do a webinar for us. As I mentioned, Professor Guy Ben-Gurion, he's a tenured professor at the Department of Politics and Government at BGU, where he also served as the department head from 2018 to 2022. He's a distinguished scholar in political science and international relations, having earned his doctorate in political science and government from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He also did his undergraduate work at Tel Aviv University. Professor Guy Ben-Gurion authored several books, including the award-winning Between State and Synagogue, The Secularization of Contemporary Israel. His research on the impact of economic and demographic changes on religious and secular identities in Israel won awards from the Association of Israel Studies and the Israeli Political Science Association. He's also spearheading a new research center and program at Ben-Gurion University on the concept of the shared society in the Jewish state. So feel free to ask him questions about that as well. Yoni, or Professor Yonatan Mendel, as I stated at the beginning, is really Israel's foremost authority from an academic standpoint on Gaza. In fact, he teaches the longest standing course on Gaza, which is the longest standing course of any Israeli university on the topic of Gaza. He refers to Gaza, sometimes it seems obvious now, as Israel's blind spot. He can talk more about that later. He's an associate professor in the Department of Middle East Studies at BGU and the head of the Arabic Language and Culture Division. He did his undergraduate work at Tel Aviv, his master's at the University of London. He got his PhD from Cambridge and did his postdoc work in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University. Your mother's not proud of your academic background, I'm sure, Yoni. You really underperformed. His main research interests are the position status of teaching Arabic in Israel, Jewish-Arab relations, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Professor Mendel is also a translator, and he serves as the associate editor of Maktub, a unique book series dedicated to the translation of Arabic literature into Hebrew. And as I mentioned before, he's been teaching the longest serving course on Gaza in all of Israel academia. Welcome, Guy and Yoni. to hashtag Webinar Wednesday on a Thursday.
Thank
So
you.
let's start with, I know this is called Gaza, what's next, but let's start with Gaza, what's happening now. I'm not sure who wants to lead off, but Guy, why don't you take a shot at what's happening right now?
So I think first and foremost, 59 hostages are still in Gaza, and this should be the greatest concern of everyone. And unfortunately, I'm not sure this government has the same concern as many of us do. At the moment, Israel has returned to war in Gaza. Now, this could be, of course, an attempt to use some leverage in the former negotiations regarding the hostages. However, this also might be an attempt to actually kill the deal and actually withdraw from negotiations. Any day the hostages are still there is a risk of their lives, that we know. Will Hamas be more willing to cooperate or negotiate after this military attack is uncertain, so it's a big gamble there. And also, I think we're not clear about what's the end game here. I mean, what does Israel want to achieve? Because eventually we'll come back to negotiations, which we will have to discuss the future of Gaza. And so far, the government has not really offered any horizon. So I think we're in a very worried period. And if we can talk about this later, there's also an encroachment on Israeli democracy at the same time. So I think for many of us, it's a very worrying period that keeps us very concerned for Israel's future.
Wow. And thank you for putting the hostages at the beginning of your comments. So 59, our understanding is 59 hostages still there. We believe around 24 are still alive. And so we pray for the safe return of those that are still alive and just to get everybody else back. Yoni, do you want to add anything to Guy's comments about what's happening right now?
Yeah, well, I'll start with echoing Guy and the first thing that he mentioned about the 59 hostages still in Gaza that needs to be brought back home as soon as possible. I will say that the situation in Gaza, and obviously I'm not saying anything new, is devastating. The amount of the destruction in Gaza, the amount of people killed, not only from the militants. So we now speak about, I think the latest numbers are about 60,000 that were killed from the beginning of the war. We know that up until the ceasefire, many of the Gazans had to move south to a tent town that was made around Rafah. After the ceasefire was made, so more Palestinians moved back north, many to the Gaza city. And now over the last 24 hours, I've seen that there is again movement to the south and more Israeli leaflets that are being spread there, telling people to move outside of their homes. And as the war started, another thing that can be highlighted or mentioned that we also woke up early in the morning at 4 o'clock for a rocket that was hit from the Houthis in Yemen, and that we got an alarm from the school of the children to say that everybody is safe because around 1 p.m. there were 3 rockets fired from Gaza. It's all very sad and devastating and frustrating also because it looks like the government does not really want to solve it in any other way but militarily. And this is almost a paradox because I don't think that Gaza has only a military solution, it has other solutions. And situation is rather gloomy and sad.
So I met with the Israel consulate in New York yesterday, and they were explaining that the goal is to try to force Hamas to capitulate and therefore return the hostages. Could you comment on that? I mean, obviously, this has been going on for 16 and a half months since October 7th. It's a completely tragic situation we find ourselves in. It was a barbaric attack on Israel. Israel has total right to defend itself and through military actions and others. But here we find ourselves with this, I sort of say Israel's won the battle but lost the war. And, we're not sure what the objectives are of this mission, and then where do we go from here?
Well, I'll just remind us all that when the ceasefire broke, there were supposed to be two stages. The first stage, in which Israeli hostages are being released in return to Palestinian prisoners that are being released from Israeli prison, and that from the day 16 or 22, now I cannot remember, they had to start discussing stage two. And stage two, stage B, this is a stage that has yet to begin, because the whole idea about stage B is that it needs to have also an end, a solution or a long-term solution in which Israel agrees to what will be the situation once its troops withdraw from the Gaza Strip. And I think that Israel's principle is that when Israel leaves the Gaza Strip, Hamas is not going to be there. And Hamas' principle is that when Israel withdraw, Hamas will stay there. So it's a circle that is very much hard to make it into a square, and this is why we do not see any movement towards stage B. I think also that there is also obviously a political question there that has to be asked, and this is whether Israel thinks that the Palestinian conflict generally can be solved. And if it can be solved, what are the solutions that Israel would like to put on the table? We know that solutions that are not there in order to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are many times encouraged by Israel. For example, the immigration of 2 million Palestinians from Gaza outside. So this is something that Israel would like to see happening. But speaking about them remaining in Gaza and bringing the Palestinian Authority, for example, into the Gaza Strip is not something that Israel would like to see. So it takes us into more political questions of how the conflict eventually ends and whether Israel would like to maintain, administer, see an end to the conflict, or because the current Israeli government does not believe that this conflict has a solution. So the continuation of the war is almost the only possible to see any future coming out of it. But and again, I said it before, I mentioned the word gloomy and sad and frustrating and devastating, because this is also the feeling that we have vis-a-vis the Israeli politics, and sometimes decisions that I will call them cynical. We are just about Israeli government has to promote or to finish, a guy helped me with the English, the Israeli budget to the next year, to the year 2025, 2026. And we saw that Ben-Gurion just entered into the government again. And sadly, these things are all tied together.
All right, we're
Yeah,
starting to get some questions build up, but Guy, do you want to respond to what Yoni just said?
yeah, I just would like to add that we always, when we discuss politics, there's internal and external dimensions. So internally, I think what we're seeing here is an attempt to keep the government together, including the elements that object to any ending of the war. Kind of a balancing act that Netanyahu does for more than a year and a half. So the return of Ben-Gurion to the government may be for at least from my perspective, a worrying sign, because Ben-Gurion has prided himself on being able to obstruct all previous deals. So having a government with those extreme right-wing elements is one that will be very difficult to hold real negotiations with the Palestinians over the hostages. So that's one worrying issue. Also, I think that the American government position also allows Israel to maintain a hardline position. Now, again, objectively, you can say there is a threat. Hamas is a threat to Israel. There's no question about that. But politics is always about choices, and worse than better choices or worse than worse choices. And at the moment, I think the top priority is to bring back the hostages, to stabilize Gaza under some regime which is not Hamas. But for this, Israel has to make a plan to put together a horizon, which, again, so far, for internal reasons, is not there.
Lots to process. We're getting a lot of questions in. One of them is very basic but very good. It's coming from an anonymous attendee. And they're asking, could you comment on the idea or assertion that has been made that as long as there is war in Gaza, Netanyahu will stay as the prime minister. And as long as Netanyahu is the prime minister, there will be war in Gaza, meaning the only way out of this war is Netanyahu not being prime minister.
So I think it's a big question that also people are in the streets demonstrating about right now for a few days now. The question was, after October 7th, should the government resign? I mean, this was a complete failure, what Yoni calls a blind spot, and there was a responsibility. So the government is trying to shed responsibility to the military, Secret Service, which of course has a great responsibility, but obviously at the end of the day, there is a government that has to take responsibility. And again, delaying this debate or delaying the nomination of a committee to investigate what happened in October 7th keeps the government in power. So again, it's a balancing act which the war in Gaza, Yoni said cynical decisions, and I tend to agree, tends to also keep the government in power. Again, you might have other reasons for the war, and you could say there is a threat, but under this government, the level of trust that I have in it is rather low.
I'll just add to it, Doug, the people who are now out there in the streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, it's just to explain how sensitive the situation here or how dramatic. Many of them are calling to the end of the war and the release of the hostages. Many others are calling to are standing aside the head of the Israeli Shin Bet, Shabak, who was supposed to be sacked by Netanyahu for not being loyal enough to Netanyahu, and the general attorney of Israel that is also being threatened with the same threats. So we see quite a dramatic political moment. I say dramatic, maybe I should mention other names, but Israel is found in a very explosive moment and in a very sensitive situation, at least in a very dramatic situation, and there is an obvious fear that things are not going to get better. We had never had a situation like this before. Maybe Guy can correct me, in which Prime Minister tries to fire the head of Shabak and tries to fire the general attorney, and the general situation is I think unprecedented. Definitely, when we speak about these processes that happen through an ongoing war.
Well, in the past, there were attempts and there were firing of the head of the Secret Service and of the general attorney. But here we have a more complex situation in which both of them are investigating corruption of government. And what we know of today, to a certain level of certainty, is that people around the prime minister in a very close circles were receiving funding from Qatar. Netanyahu's close aides were on the payroll of Qatar. We know that for sure about one of them. And now the Secret Service has to investigate who got what and what was given in return. And this puts the whole government under pressure. So the answer is, let's fire the Secret Service head who's investigating that and the general attorney. And that's why it's so complex. So it's not just about their performance or difference of opinion. It's also about a conflicting interest. So that's a very complex situation we've never been to before.
And in which the prime minister, to begin with, it has to go to court once every few weeks for his own personal trial.
Yeah.
Okay, we are getting a lot of questions coming in, so thank you both for joining us. I'm just trying to summarize some of what the questions are asking. People understand that it's a very difficult situation. If either of you were the prime minister, what would your plan be right now to try to get the hostages home while removing the threat of Hamas?
I'm not discounting the difficulty of the situation. I mean, Hamas is a threat to Israel. But again, there are priorities and there are choices and there are worse choices. So for me, the first choice would be to negotiate the release of the prisoners, or the hostages, Israeli hostages, in return for Palestinian prisoners and the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. At the same time, I think Israel had a window of opportunity of creating alternatives, working with the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia, with the US, of creating an alternative regime in Gaza. I mean, giving the Gazans some hope. And if they don't have hope, I'm not sure we will have hope. And instead of focusing on ideas that have no moral grounding and no real chance of happening, like the movement of 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, we need to focus on what can be done. There will be risks, there'll be difficulties. I always tell my students, at the end of the day, nobody's going anywhere. We're all staying here. And that's how we should start thinking about the future.
Tony, you
I'll
want to
say,
add on that, and then I'll
yes,
ask.
first I'll say something historical, that this is not the first time that Israel has a problem with Gaza. In 1970, Ariel Sharon was given the task of ending the terror from Gaza. And in 1984, he claimed, or he said, that the terror from Gaza is over. And then in 1987, the Intifada began in Gaza. I think once every 10 years or 15 years, there is a desire to see Gaza disappears, because Gaza resembles much more than one problem, which is military. Gaza poses a military, political, historical, and other problems as well because of different issues relating to the Palestinian people. For example, the fact that 75% of the people living in Gaza are considered refugees. So I think first to learn something from history. I don't think that even if Israel is strong enough or whatever to kill all people from Hamas, then the Israeli security will end, will get better, and then the terror will end. I don't think so. I think that you need to find much deeper solutions and much more courageous solutions. Currently, there are two solutions, or at least two plans on the table. One was said or was given by President Trump in the beginning of February, in which there will be 2 million Palestinians that will have to leave Gaza. And at the beginning, President Trump said that they will be allowed back, and then he said that they will not be allowed back because they will have beautiful lives. And then he said that so there is this plan in which America takes over Gaza. And again, I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I think as I can. I don't see this happening, and I don't think that it should happen. Then you have another plan that was in a way a response to the Trump plan, and this is in a way answering your question, Doug, which is the Egyptian plan. And the Egyptian plan not only said that we, the Arab countries, are going to put $53 billion into the rehabilitation of Gaza, but also that we think that there needs to be another power controlling Gaza, and this should be the Palestinian Authority, and this should be a government of technocrats, and so on and so forth. So without saying this very directly, they actually said the day after will be Hamas free, controlling the Gaza Strip. But both Israel and the USA does not want to see something like this happening, because
Yeah, so
at the end of that solution, you have some kind of a political settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that maybe also involves the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and other questions that Israeli governments are not willing currently to discuss. So currently, if I was the prime minister, I was definitely thinking first about the hostages, freeing the hostages, and the security of Israel will be dealt with later. This is the first thing that we need to be worried about, and Israeli security can be secured also after the hostages are back here, and even if Hamas is still in power, because Israel has agency to change the situation. It just need to do it.
Okay, well that was a lot, but thank you. So we called this webinar Gaza, what's next? So let's talk about the day after. And you just articulated that there are two ideas on the table, and neither of them coming from Israel. But the first idea coming from President Trump, where the U.S. would take over Gaza, and turn it into a Riviera, some major real estate development plan that Gazans would need to leave temporarily or permanently. I don't know. You said both, and then come back. The other plan, let's just call it the Arab Nation plan, would be that the Palestinian Authorities in control of Gaza, but militarily or security, it wouldn't be the Palestinian Authority. So could you comment on maybe quickly the pros and cons of each of these ideas? And then do you think there's another idea out there that hasn't been articulated?
Well, first, I think that the plan that was put on the table by President Trump is in a way resembles what the current Israeli government would like to see. It does not want to see it does want to encourage Palestinian emigration from Gaza into other countries. This was also the situation in 1967, 1968, again by Israel. And this was also what Minister Smotrich said in December 2023, in which he said that we cannot live next to 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. We could live next to 200,000 Palestinians in Gaza. So if you do the math, when President Trump spoke about 1.8 million, and you look at Smotrich speaking about 2 million minus whatever number that equals 200,000, so you know that they speak about the same numbers. So I don't think that the President Trump plan is totally disconnected from the current Israeli government perspective. I do think that the pros of the Egyptian plan, first, that it focused on another plan that is called the Saudi plan from 2002. Saudi plan from 2002 says that following the reaching the agreement with Israel, Israel will have diplomatic relations with all Arab countries and all Muslim countries. And this is something that will have to be solved according to the Saudi plan on 67 line and the creation of a Palestinian state and so on and so forth. The pros of that is that Israel will solve many problems together. And another pro is that Israel can also even negotiate the demilitarization of the Palestinian state. And as much in the current situation that the Palestinians are at, I think that they will be happily speaking about the end or the withdrawal of Israel and the creation of a Palestinian state that will be demilitarized. But I think that Israel is not willing to discuss or to negotiate something like that at the moment.
Guy, any point of view on the two alternatives right now, or another one that's missing?
So I think that the Trump plan is not a plan, it's an idea, because I don't think there's a plan. I don't think there's any realistic way of a place that 2 million Palestinians will go to, who will fund this. I mean, if you go into the practical questions, leave aside the moral idea. Where are you going to move 2 million Palestinians? Who's going to pay for that? I mean, the American taxpayer is going to pay for that? Obviously not. He wants to put the bill on the Saudis. I mean, this all sounds completely unrealistic. It sounds like an idea thrown in the air with no real material aspect to it. So I mean, putting aside the moral question, even practically, I think there's another option that could emerge, and I hope it will not, is that Israel goes back to control Gaza. And we've been there. I've been there as a soldier. I mean, I've done that for many months. It was costly. It was ugly. It cost us quite a lot in many aspects. It's going to even cost more now. And if you think you can overstretch the military into reoccupying Gaza and managing these 2 million people, I think that, again, it's very unrealistic. So at the end of the day, we come back to any plan that can be orchestrated by the Egyptians, by the Saudis, by the world, in which Israel creates a deal with the Palestinians. Now, that's not a risk-free. I mean, there's risk in everything. I mean, there's a risk. And the question is, can Israel live next to 2 million Palestinians in Gaza? Well, if the government can't do that, then resign. Very simple. If the government can't have any other answer other than an unrealistic idea of moving 2 million Palestinians to defend Israel, then resign and let someone else do the job. It's quite simple.
It was an idea. I will just add to Guy that these Palestinians will move to places like Somaliland and Puntland and other countries that I cannot really pronounce, without consulting also them countries, and obviously without asking the Palestinians, which is another issue. Palestinians, despite the fact that the situation is so bad there, I don't see them leaving very quickly in hundreds of thousands of people. The Palestinians who live in Gaza have also different ideas and different national principles. One of them is Sumud, in which they consider staying in where they are as a principle, as a national principle. This goes back to 1948, and this goes back also to 1967, and this goes back to an idea that one who leaves does not go back. And I think that obviously one would like, or the Israeli people or Israeli government looks at the Israeli interest, but we need to make sure that we also know the other side and understand the other side, its desires, its fears, its national plans, ambitions, identity. Sometimes it feels as if the people taking the decision thinks that this is like Lego cubes that you move from one place to another. I don't see this coming.
I want to add something to that. I think there's a danger here. In this precedent, people can be moved against their will to solve problems. Because 10 years down the road, someone might say, you know what? We have 8 million Jews in the Middle East, and we can't really fit them in. Maybe we should move there somewhere else. So if we don't respect the right of people to live in their homelands and negotiate from that position, this could turn back on us. I think we should start from the point that you don't move people against their will. This is a moral principle that should try to hold on to, because if we don't hold to that, it might turn back on us.
Right. I mean, people could be given incentives to move, and then it's by their free will if they chose that. But
People, obviously, if the US wants to offer Palestinians visas to the US and, ask them if they want to come to the US, I mean, fine, go ahead with it. I'm sure you're not going to offer 2 million. But if people want to leave Gaza, it's their right. Nobody should be held against his will in a place he lives in. But
Now,
that's not
Gaza was part of Egypt between 48 and 67. When there are 120 million Egyptians, something like that. Why wouldn't Egypt want to absorb the Gazans again?
because during the peace negotiations with Egypt in 1978, Egypt said clearly, this is part of the Palestinian future state. Palestinians' issue should be solved by Israel, not by us. And if you want to offer Gaza to Egypt with the territory, that's also a possibility. I don't know, but again, I don't think that's on the table.
No, Egyptians will not do that.
And that's because why, Yanni?
Well, the Egyptians already felt that signing the peace agreement with Israel in 1978 kind of pushed the Palestinian or left the Palestinian alone in their conflict with Israel, because up until 1978, we speak about President Nasser, followed by President Anwar Sadat, that they were like the mother of the Palestinians. I speak politically, or at least they were a major player there. And also when they signed the peace agreement in 1978 with Israel, one of the first clauses was that Israel will continue to other peace treaties with other countries and territories occupied, held from 1967. I think that the Egyptians would not like to be seen as if they are harming the Palestinian cause, and currently Palestinian has an authority and saying that it will annex the Gaza Strip into Egypt will be seen very badly also in the Arab arena, in the Arab world, and in the Arab League. So this is not something that they will do. And even if we speak economically or financially, Egypt has so many other troubles that the last thing that they need is also to add 2 million Palestinians, many of them affiliated with a group that is affiliated with the Muslim Brothers, which is seen in Egypt as its biggest internal threat. So I don't see this coming.
Very, very difficult situation. Give us some hope.
I want to give
You have some ideas, some inspiration.
Hope.
We were talking a little before about how it used to be. And can we maybe describe to the audience growing up, maybe what it used to be like as an Israeli going into Gaza? And do you think there's a way someday to get back there?
I don't want to idealize the past. I mean, Gaza was under occupation of the Israeli army, and from 67 to 87, it could hold Gaza with limited military force. But this was still an occupation. People did not have rights there. So you could say there was some economic benefits, maybe. There was still a poor area that did not that did not have any democratic rights. In 87, this all erupted in the First Intifada when the uprising began, which made the cost of occupation higher. It may mean that we had to serve more military in the territories. It meant that Israel's foreign image was tarnished by pictures of soldiers quarreling with civilians. It had an economic cost, and that's what led us initially to the first attempt to make peace with the Palestinians, which obviously failed. And we can, this is a long discussion whose fault it is, but it doesn't really matter. I think we're at square one. As Yoni said here, we need to resolve the issue with the Palestinians. Force obviously is part of every country's arsenal of what it can do, but force alone cannot solve the issue. And again, we can try and use more force, but at the end of the day, and I think if we think of Israel's democracy and Israel's idea of a Jewish and democratic state, and it's kind of a very simple equation. If Israel annexes the West Bank and Gaza, it will either not be a Jewish state, will have an Arab majority, will not be a democracy because the whole people under military rule. So these are the kind of, I think, the parameters of the decision. You want hope. It's a difficult day to give hope. My hope is that people are on the streets. And I think they know that for 5 years now, people are fighting on the streets for different causes. And I think where there's a struggle, there's some hope. So in that sense, I think that Israelis, yesterday there were 100,000 people in Jerusalem calling to bring back the hostages and end the war. And this gives me some hope that democracy still has some vibrancy in it, that we're not playing dead yet. That's where my hope lies at the moment.
Well, but what does the deal look like that brings the hostages home and ends the war? It leaves Hamas in power? Is there a deal there, or can it not be achieved?
I think the deal is first to bring the hostages back home and then to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, because that will be part of the deal. Then we'll have to negotiate what happens next in Gaza. Will Hamas stay in power? I think Israel still has much leverage over what happens next in Gaza. It still controls the borders of Gaza. It's also what Israel offers as an alternative. For example, who do you want to rule Gaza instead of Hamas? Obviously, it will not be the US. I don't see the US putting troops on the ground. So there have to be something in the lines of what Yoni said before. That's the only way forward that I can see.
The only way for the Trump plan to even work would be to put US troops on the ground, right?
Yeah, but again, I said I don't think it's a plan. It's
an idea, disruptive idea. He's good at that.
It's almost an idea, not a plan. A plan has kind of ends and goals and parameters. This is not a plan. It's an idea. Let's create a Riviera in Gaza, move them out. Maybe
when Netanyahu came to the States, he was kind of supporting Trump's idea.
Because it helps them divert attention from the situation on the ground. I mean, again, this is part of the yeah. Yoni, maybe you want to add to that.
I want to mention two things that maybe contributed to the radicalization of the situation. And speaking, for example, about the Palestinian society, and then maybe we can think about, well, it's not going to be positive, but at least we can put our finger on two of the problems. One is that the last time that Palestinians went to the ballots for elections was in 2006. So it means that we are speaking of society that for the last, let's say, 20 years, okay, 19 years, 20 years, did not go to vote. So political system terribly paralyzed. You have the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, and you have Hamas in power in the Gaza Strip, and you have the Palestinian people in between that are not voting. So we don't know also what do they want? There is not a Palestinian leader that is considered with legitimacy coming from the Palestinian people, and this is a very dangerous situation. I think that Israel, and this is a sad insight, almost celebrated that fact that the Palestinians in Gaza and the Palestinians in the West Bank do not speak with one another, that the Palestinian Fatah and Palestinian Hamas do not speak with one another, and that there is no way to move forward with negotiation because the Palestinian people themselves are in great split. I think this is not a reason for celebration whatsoever. Only if making us a political solution further and further away is something to celebrate. So I think this was very short-sighted, and I think that Palestinians should go to vote, and I think this is something that could stimulate, stabilize, make the situation better. And obviously, it's not going to be, I don't know, so Hamas will not be able to be one of the parties, but still, I think that elections should be made. Another thing that also contributed to the radicalization is the people themselves. The median age in Gaza is 19. The median age, by the way, in Israel is 29. The median age in the USA is 39. The median age in 19, it means that more than 1 million people in Gaza are somewhere in between the age of 0 and 19. And if you go 19 years back, so you go to the year 2006, this is the year of the disengagement, the Palestinian election, and the taking over of Hamas over the Gaza Strip. It means that half of the population of Gaza, the only thing that they know is Gaza in between Rafah and Beit Hanun, living under Hamas autocratic regime, living under Israeli and Egyptian siege, meaning they cannot live by boat or by plane or by land. And this is the situation of, let's say, 60, 70% of the people in Gaza, because even if you are 21 or 22 years old, this is still the realities that you know. And I think these two things together contributed to the radicalization. It means the people there do not have any other things that they know except living under Hamas, living in Gaza, living under Israeli and Egyptian siege. And this is a very bad situation. And I think that Israel should have seen that nothing good is coming out of the ongoing freezing of negotiation, ongoing stepping in place, or ongoing paralysis of the Palestinian politics. It did not contribute to Israeli security as an understatement.
We're getting some questions about is there a conflict from the past that we could learn from as it relates to this situation? Some people are asking about World War II and the idea of unconditional surrender by the Germans or the Japanese, and then a Marshall Plan to rebuild. Do you see anything like that? Is there some conflict that could from the past that would tell us this might be a reasonable approach that could rationalize what we're seeing right now, or not?
Analogy is always a risk. I mean, I was studying of the comparative conflicts, where it was looked at Northern Ireland, South Africa, and Israel, and two of them are resolved, and we're still in our conflict. So I mean that stage of analogies is out. I think World War II has some lessons. First, we think of Nazi Germany as the utmost evil, and 10 years later, it's a country that we all negotiate with, talk to, visit, etc. Et so I think that entrenchment of culture and hatred are not necessarily eternal. Also, I think that the Marshall Plan is a good idea, because I think that Germany was rebuilt after the war, which was kind of a, if you learn your history, it's kind of a lesson from World War I, where it was actually humiliating. So in between those lines, I think that we need to, I mean, obviously, we have lots of resentment, hate, and worry about Gaza now, and for good reason. But I think we also should look at the future, and people are living there, and they'll be living next to us probably for a long time. And therefore, I think we need to think of those lines of how do we make things better for both sides, while again addressing the concerns and the fears of Israelis. I mean, I don't want to discount that. I mean, we live 30 minutes away from Gaza, and this is October 7th has been a trauma. So I think the fact that many Israelis today have difficulty of seeing those alternatives can be explained. I mean, yes, I mean, we're traumatized. I think it's the leadership that has to kind of push people beyond those fears into some progressive idea towards the future.
Yoni?
Well, I sometimes I feel that the comparison to World War II and to the Nazis is also has its risks, or it could be also dangerous. I remember the president of the State of Israel, Herzog, in one of the press conferences, standing with Mein Kampf translated to Arabic that was found in one of the houses of the Palestinian militants in Gaza, and he says, "This is what we are dealing with." And I think that this is it's too wide. The Palestinians, the 2 million Palestinians who lives in Gaza are not Nazis. They are something else. The horrendous, terrible, murderous things that have been done on October 7 are unexplainable. And I visited Nir Oz the other week, and it seriously could not be described. But looking at World War II and speaking about a war between countries and speaking about the situation here between Israel and the Palestinian people, in which for the last 76 years you have a state called Israel that is very strong. It is the strongest military power in the Middle East. According to foreign sources, it has nuclear capabilities. Facing people in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, that those in the West Bank are living in Area A and some of them are living in Area B and fighting to have a state, and then having people living in the Gaza Strip for the last 70 years under Hamas and under Israeli siege. It's quite a complicated situation, and obviously this one cannot even start thinking about explaining what happened in October 7 in the sense of saying that it cannot. But in order to solve the conflict, I see that you need to deal seriously with a political spring or political pool or political thing that keeps creating it, and it caused the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It has its reasons. There is a real conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and I think giving it a blind eye and imagining Israel as a post-conflict country is a mistake. We are not. There is a serious, open conflict with the Palestinians that has never been solved. Israel can tomorrow morning solve it by saying that it's going to annex all of the West Bank, and then all of the Israeli villages, settlements there are going to be legal, but also 3 million Palestinians will have to receive Israeli citizenship. Israel does not want to do it because it does not want to change the demographic situation. So we are living in an ongoing limbo in which Israel controls the West Bank, but only it's the people living there that are Jewish are its citizens, and people who are not Jewish are considered people that are part of a Palestinian authority that does not even exist. So
Yeah,
there is a huge political problem that is not solved, and this is not a fight between two countries.
right. I think we're going to have to take the West Bank and the two-state solution and its relationship to Gaza and do another webinar on that, because that's complicated and was something people were pushing for. How does that happen now? Who knows? Let's try to deal with Gaza, and then we'll come back to that. We've got a question around Hamas and their charter, right? So Hamas charter calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. Is it realistic at all to imagine that Hamas, if they're left in power, would agree to Israel's right to exist and therefore be a government you could actually negotiate with?
I think we all had blind spots about Hamas, including myself. I mean, I don't think I was expecting anything like October 7th, and I did have some thoughts of pragmatism within Hamas, that we could, manage the situation without escalating into conflict. And also, of course, the government. I mean, Netanyahu said very clearly Hamas is an asset because having Hamas in power resolves the need to deal with the Palestinians because, they don't recognize Israel. Henceforth, we're done. Um, I, I mean, Yoni's a bigger expert than I on Hamas. I tend to be doubtful about Hamas being a negotiating partner. I think we have to create an alternative for Hamas, which will be more reasonable towards the Palestinians and for what we would need for a peace settlement. But I don't think we should hold everything on our expectations from Hamas to change the charter. I mean, I don't think I depend on Hamas for my existence, and therefore either Hamas will have to be replaced or we'll have to keep, dealing with Hamas in somehow. But again, I would not rely on that for my future.
Yoni?
Yeah. Well, first, I'll say that Hamas is a movement that committed terrible crimes. It's also an idea bringing together Palestinian identity on the one hand and the military wing on the other hand. And I think that in order to kill it, you need to have another idea. And Israel is not willing to speak about the other idea. Um, Sometimes I say to my Israeli friends or counterparts, okay, let's say that all of your dreams come true, and that's it. There is no Hamas, there are no weapons in Gaza, there is no Sinwar, there is no incitement, there are no tunnels, there is not one Qassam missile, there is nothing like that. What Israel then does? Then Israel is willing to discuss the two-state solution, West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and a just solution to the ongoing Palestinian refugee question and release of prisoners and speaking about Jerusalem? Probably not. So in a way, the continuation of the war with Gaza and claiming that Hamas are Nazis or all the Palestinians are Nazis and they are all there is not one innocent person in Gaza and that we should flatten Gaza and so on and so forth, in a way serve the ongoing situation in the sense that it is not going to be solved, which is better for some Israelis than dealing seriously with the conflict. Now, speaking about Hamas, I think that I don't know, nobody knows to begin with. Imagine that there was an army here with Shin Bet and with military intelligence and so on and so forth that was totally surprised in October 7. So it's hard to predict. I will just say that there are movements in the past that said different things on paper and did other things in reality. I think that when Israel eventually signed the peace agreement or the peace accords with Yasser Arafat in the White House in 1993, there was an ongoing debate whether the PLO really deleted the clause in its charter that said, or maybe it did not, and so on and so forth. Hamas said a few times, and it goes way before October 7 because it's very hard to say something, I don't know, pragmatic in terms of what is happening over the last 2, 3 years. But in 2010 and 2014 and 2016, Hamas offered different hudnas, which are ceasefires, in which they said that we are willing to go into 20 years ceasefire or 30 years ceasefire and allow the next generation to decide whether they would like to sign a peace agreement with Israel or not.
All right,
Whether
well,
this would have end in a peace treaty or not, nobody can say.
This hour-long conversation flew right by, and we could keep going for a couple more hours, but we're not going to. I want to thank both of you for joining us today for all your insight and some hopefulness I heard in between the darkness of the reality of the situation. But thank you to both Professor Guy Ben-Prat and Professor Yonatan Mendel for joining us on this webinar Thursday edition of Gaza, What Comes Next. For those of you who want to support our work, we've launched a new effort we call the Pop-Up Shop. It's a way to just express our thank you with some cute little gifts. And if you're interested, you could click on that QR code and make a small donation, and we'll send you the gift of your choice. So thank you for supporting our work. For those looking for more interesting events and experiences from Ben-Gurion University, we have A4BGU's Remarkable Resilience, our national virtual webinar experience. It's free to attend, and it's scheduled for Wednesday, May 7th at noon Eastern Time. This will be a really terrific program. So you can also click on that QR code to register for remarkable resilience, excellence in the face of adversity. And if that's not enough, later in May, we have the annual Board of Governors meeting in Israel, which is also a showcase of research activity and interaction with the students who, as you know, have been serving as reservists. And if you haven't been to Israel since October 7th, it's important to go. And we have a wonderful trip coming up right now that you could join for all or part of your experience. Again, another QR code, May 11th to the 15th. If you have questions, you can reach Cheryl on our staff. She's happy to give you that information. And if flying overseas just isn't realistic in your future, we are proud to announce our annual meeting and Ben-Gurion University Showcase that will be taking place in New York City in the fall, a wonderful time to visit the Big Apple, October 19th to the 21st. The evening of Sunday, October 19th, will feature what we call the New York Benefit, with some incredible programming and entertainment to be announced at a later date. So again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Guy and to Yonatan. David Ben-Gurion, the founder and first prime minister of Israel and the namesake of our university, said many great things. And one quote he had that resonates with me these days is that the future of Israel doesn't just emerge from the Negev, which we talk about a lot, but is dependent on two things, on her strength and on her righteousness. And may we pray for the soldiers to continue to do the job that is necessary for them. May we pray for the safe return of the hostages. And may we also pray for Israel's righteousness and Jewish soul to find our way forward in the midst of all of this darkness. Thank you all for joining us. We have Passover coming up in a few weeks, and we wish you and your families the very best. Thank you again.